Welcome to Temple University, Japan. I'm extremely happy to welcome our friend, Professor Chintamani Mahapatra, who has very kindly agreed to speak in this session and whom we met in Tokyo when he gave us a fascinating briefing on Indian foreign policy and strategic issues. He's a founder and chairperson of the Kalinga Institute of Indo-Pacific Studies. He's extremely well-traveled and extremely knowledgeable about whole strategic issues relating not only to the Indian subcontinent, but also to the broader Indo-Pacific region. So without further ado, I'd like to welcome him, and my colleague, Evelyn Forloff, who is running this session, will say a few words on the logistics, and then we will start with the presentation followed by Q&A. Evelyn, the floor is yours.
Okay, thank you very much, Robert, for the introduction. And very briefly on the Q&A, so we will let Professor Chintamani give a speech about 20-30 minutes, and then we will open the floor so whoever has a question. So if you want to ask a question, make sure to put in the chat so we as a host can see it. If you want to hide your name, you can feel free to send the question to us privately as well. In that case, we will not read out your name, but it will be, just make sure that we as co-hosts or as hosts can access your message in the group. So, Professor Chintamani, please.
Namaste and good afternoon to all of you. Let me at the outset express my gratitude to Robert for at least giving me a platform and an opportunity to interact with all of you on a topic which is at least important to India. And Evelyn, thank you so much for moderating the session. What I'll do is briefly I'll talk about the evolution of India's policy and strategy towards the Indo-Pacific, then very quickly come to the present and explain India's approach to the Indo-Pacific and what kind of strategies India has adopted towards different kind of developments taking place in this region. Now, India, as all of you know, is an ancient country, a very old civilization, and its connection with an area which is today known as Indo-Pacific are centuries old. India's soft power in terms of sending ideas and people and even religion to different countries who today reside in the Indo-Pacific have been there for centuries. When the Second World War was going on, and the person who would become the Prime Minister of India after independence, he was in jail. And in jail, he was writing his pigeon diary. And in 1943, in that pigeon diary, he visualized that after becoming independent, India will play a significant role in Asia-Pacific. He used the term Asia-Pacific in 1943. 4 years later, even before India would become independent, the would-be Prime Minister of India convened an Asian Relations Conference where there were about 28 countries, including Japan, and even Tibet as an independent country were part of the Asian Relations Conference. And there, Nehru, he floated the idea of all the countries of the Asia-Pacific should come together and try to promote decolonization and mutual cooperation so that the Asian countries would not be the petitioners in the Western courts. 2 years later, in 1949, the Dutch military action against the Indonesian nationalists, yet again, India convened an Asian Relations Conference and floated similar kind of idea about cooperation, positive cooperation on very many issues in Asia. And then, of course, we all know about the Bandung Conference in 1955 that took place. There also India, China, and so many Asian countries and 4 African countries are part of it because a large part of India, large part of Africa was still, they were the colonies and all that. So in the Bandung Conference, people say that was the beginning of a movement called non-aligned movement in the midst of the Cold War. And India was one of the important members of non-aligned movement. However, as the Cold War unfolded, India's vision, India's policy, India's strategy got sunk. India stopped talking about Asia Pacific or Asia or region beyond that. Although it was very much a leader of the non-aligned movement, India's focus was only on South Asia, the bordering countries in South Asia and China. And the main reason was India was in a way boxed because of the geopolitical developments. India had to fight about 2-3 rounds of wars with Pakistan, then with China. So India's interaction with what later came to be known as Asia Pacific was rather constricted and limited. The moment the Cold War comes to an end, then India's engagement, India's vision, India's policy and strategy went much beyond South Asia. There were prime ministers who talked about immediate neighborhood and extended neighborhood. But then there was also a prime minister who talked about a new doctrine called Look East policy, where India began to engage Southeast Asian countries and all. Then again, fast forward, when Narendra Modi becomes the Prime Minister of India in 2014, then he turned Look East into Act East policy and began to engage with the countries of the region more deeply than before. Around the same time, in 2015, when he was visiting Mauritius, he announced a policy which is, the acronym is SAGAR, SAGAR. That means security for all. SAGA, security and growth for all, SAGAR. That was the vision. The reason I'm saying this is even before the war, Nehru talked about the whole of Asia and cooperation among them. And now, after the end of the Cold War, here is a prime minister who does not talk about only India's engagement with the selected countries, but SAGAR, security and growth for all, in a large part of Asia. And 3 years later, this was the time when the very concept of Indo-Pacific was evolving. And when Prime Minister Modi goes to the Shangri-La Dialogue in 2018, for the first time, he spelled out a clear-cut policy of India towards the Indo-Pacific. Now, like many other countries, including Japan and the United States, where the emphasis was given on free, open, peaceful, and prosperous and rule-based order in the Indo-Pacific, one word that Narendra Modi included in his speech was the Indo-Pacific region should be inclusive, and that sent a message. Inclusive means Indo-Pacific is not going to be a strategic construct where there will be countries in and many countries out. It should be inclusive. And that was the policy to involve each and every country. And today, there are 38 countries in the Indo-Pacific region, more than 60% of the world trade, more than 65% of the energy trade. Almost half of people of the world live in this particular region. And this is where India would like to play an important role. Now, the other areas where India's policy and India's strategy converge with other countries are, there should be freedom of navigation. And of course, the rule of law should be respected by everyone. There should be respect for sovereignty and territorial integrity of other countries. Nothing should be done unilaterally. And if there are disputes, they have always been there. All the disputes should be resolved only through dialogue and diplomacy. And then India's policy is also very important because India does not propose to have any kind of new architecture, security architecture, or even economic architecture encompassing the whole region. India at the moment would like to capitalize on the existing mechanism. There are so many bilateral, trilateral, minilateral, multilateral organizations are there. You have the EAS, East Asia Summit. We have the ASEAN Regional Forum. Then we have even Indian Ocean Rim Association. There are so many structures are there. How to promote peace and stability in the region and promote growth and prosperity are the goals by utilizing the existing mechanism of different kind of minilateral and multilateral groupings in this part of the world. So this was actually important because India would not like to proposed that India would like to be the leader and form different kind of organizations. No, nothing like that. And subsequently, in 2019, when Prime Minister Modi was attending the EAS or East Asia Summit, he made another proposal, and that is known as IPOI, Indo-Pacific Ocean Initiative. That is the key. Now, in the drawing table or in seminar rooms or even most of the newspaper articles, when people talk about India and the Indo-Pacific, immediately, they conjure up visions of how China is flexing its muscle, how India is going to deal with it. No. India's strategy and policy and vision in the Indo-Pacific is not confined just to certain strategic developments, whether China or North Korea. It goes much beyond that. Now, in that, this IPOI proposal was actually important. IPOI proposal involved almost 7 different pillars. One was, of course, maritime security, then maritime resources, then capacity building and sharing of resources with other countries, because there are so many unequal developments in this part of the world. Then it also involves cooperation in science and technology and academic activities among all these 38 countries who reside in the Indo-Pacific. Now, we know very well the natural disasters hit Indo-Pacific almost on a monthly basis, sometimes weekly basis. So another important pillar in that IPOI or Indo-Pacific Ocean Initiative was disaster management, and how to reduce disaster and how to manage the disaster once it occurs. That was another important aspect. Then, of course, trade, connectivity was another pillar. Again, let me emphasize here, although Prime Minister Modi proposed IPOI and delineated 7 different areas of potential collaboration in the Indo-Pacific, he did not say that India is going to be the leader of all these groups. India would be the driving force, one among many driving forces. Other countries should partner with India and take the lead in some of the pillars. For example, Australia is the leader on issues related to maritime ecology. Then Japan is a leader in the field of building up connectivity in the Indo-Pacific region. So this was basically India's policy towards the Indo-Pacific. And in this IPOI, when India talks about maritime security, all kinds of securities are involved. There are cases of piracy, then you have maritime terrorism, you have smuggling, there are issues like human trafficking. So these are the key security issues where countries have to cooperate and collaborate. No single country can handle it. And unless these issues are resolved or tackled, then having a vision or dream about prosperity will not be realized. And then when you talk about ecology, then of course we all know that most of the stress, most of the difficulties in the maritime domain are anthropogenic. Anthropogenic means it is all the contribution of human activities. For example, pollution, marine pollution. Then you have different kind of litters. Then you have plastic. Both macro and microplastic are really creating a lot of problem, not only for the marine lives, but also for human consumption of or use of marine resources. So this is one of the important things that Indian academics are discussing is whenever we talk about maritime domain awareness, generally people talk about the ocean surface issues, because there are a lot of things happening, including illegal, unreported, unregulated fishing. Some countries fish a lot, some countries are deprived of it, and resources are not allocated properly. So, and in addition to that, there are so many things happening under the water. So Indian academics are now saying that as part of the maritime domain awareness and maintaining maritime security, it is important to even focus on the underwater developments taking place in this particular area. Then how to address even so many urban centers have come up along the coast, and you have so many commercial infrastructure in this particular region, and how best to handle that, because they are continuously perceiving a threat, facing a threat rather, from different kind of disasters taking place, and how to handle that. And then resources should be again shared by many, while on the one hand we have to preserve and protect the marine resources for maintaining the sustainability. On the other hand, there should be equitable distribution also. We have so many small island countries in South Pacific, in the Indian Ocean, but they are facing all kinds of problems. So how best to build the capacity among them so that they can also enjoy the resources of the marine region, the maritime resources and all. So broadly, these are the policy of Government of India, and how it is going to create a community of partnership among all the countries if possible, or maybe different groups of countries in different pillars of the IPOI, so that there will be peace, there will be stability, and then there will be prosperity. However, if you see the other side, Indian policy is also aiming at facing different kind of challenges. One of the major challenges, ladies and gentlemen, which is agreed upon by almost everyone, is the unprecedented rise of China. So long as the rise of China was peaceful, as the Chinese government kept on talking about peaceful rise of China, every country in the world, including Japan, India, and many other countries, were trying to build bridges with China, develop economic relationship, both trade and investment, and it was a kind of win-win scenario. But of late, we have seen how the peaceful rise of China has remained only as a theory and on paper. In reality, China is flexing muscle in the South China Sea, in East China Sea, along Sino-Indian border, and that has created a lot of insecurity among the countries, including quite a few ASEAN members who also lay claim to the sovereignty of different kind of islands and shoals and reefs in South China Sea. And when China is reclaiming islands and building military facilities, that has caused another set of worries. In 2015, where Xi Jinping promised that South China Sea would not be militarized. Now the action is different. The promise was different. Similar things happening in East China Sea as well. So how best to manage this kind of disturbing development, where unilateral decisions are being made, territories are being altered by use of force or threat of use of force, is a major challenge. One of the things that India is doing is India is aware of China's power and influence and growth and its military capabilities. India is no match to China. But then, if you see from the other extreme, even the United States does not try to manage the relationship all by itself, although it is the only true superpower in the world today. Whether it is a terrorist attack in Afghanistan or suspected nuclear proliferation in Iraq, or you just name it. The US would like to team up with other countries to manage the relationship, and that is what even India is doing. That being part of Quad, that is a quadrilateral security dialogue involving Japan, US, and Australia, is one of the ways to come together, understand and examine the developments, and try to find out peaceful way of using this mechanism to prevent unilateralism, to prevent disruption of trading and other kind of activities, to prevent creation of new kind of hegemonic order in this part of the world. There is another thing that India did not do in the past. But now it has just begun to do in a very, very small scale. India has begun to involve even in defense and security collaborations with Japan, with Philippines, with Indonesia, with Vietnam, and with Singapore. So in order to develop common understanding and develop some kind of strategic convergence with the member countries, India has begun to do that. India sold BrahMos missiles to the Philippines, now negotiating with Vietnam and Indonesia. India is also donating money, some kind of credit line for buying petrol boats by the Vietnamese and things like that. Another important development is India, which was by and large tight-lipped about some of the developments in the region, is no longer that. India had supported the Philippines on the South China Sea dispute, that the Filipinos and the Chinese went to international tribunal, and finally the tribunal gave a verdict. The Chinese did not accept it. Now, in India-Philippines joint statement, India is actually expressing concern. India is saying repeatedly that there should be rule of order, rule of law, and international law should be respected, sovereignty should be respected, and things like that. It is a very clear-cut position of India. Even when the Indian Prime Minister went to the USA and joint statement was issued, concerns about development in South China Sea came up in the joint statement. The reason is that South China Sea is not very far from India. We have about more than 50% of India's trade pass through South China Sea. Most of our economic activities and relationship with the regional countries are there. So India has a stake in freedom of navigation in South China Sea. And the third important development is, and this is, I'm saying third, what is one of the key pillars of India's strategy in the Indo-Pacific, is having a robust, very robust strategic partnership with the United States. For a long time, during the Cold War, India and the United States did not see eye to eye on very many issues taking place around the world. But today, India has developed strategic convergence with the United States on a lot many issues affecting the global order. And India and the US, along with Japan and Australia, are holding even naval exercises, the Malabar exercises. India is holding naval exercises with ASEAN countries as well, and even bilateral exercises with Singapore and other countries and all. So by doing all this, let me be very frank, India does not believe in any policy of containment. Some people in China and elsewhere may think that India wants to team up with Japan and the US and Australia and try to contain China. The whole idea is not containment. As I said earlier, peaceful rise of China was benefiting everyone. But not so peaceful rise of China is disturbing the entire order in the region. So the idea is to make China truly a stakeholder and not allow it to have a new kind of hegemony. So all these activities, naval exercises, military cooperation, selling of weapons, and forming the Quad to tackle other kinds of problems is India's policy and strategy. India has three different semicircles as far as Indo-Pacific is concerned. The first semicircle is, of course, the immediate neighborhood in South Asia. The next one would be Persian Gulf this side and Southeast Asia this side. Then going beyond, the third circle, of course, includes Japan, South Korea, even the United States. India has very closely observed that very many countries, major powers, are showing more and more interest in the Indo-Pacific region. So today you have the European Union having an Indo-Pacific strategy. The French, the Dutch, and the Germans, the British, all have their Indo-Pacific strategies. Japan, Australia, even recently South Korea have their Indo-Pacific strategies. And we realize that most of these strategies are aligning with India's policy and vision and strategy in the Indo-Pacific. So India would like to collaborate with all these countries so that the resources of the Indo-Pacific can be shared, and the resources of the maritime domain can be protected, and through dialogue and diplomacy, all kinds of disruptive activities can be deterred. So these are, by and large, India's approach and strategy in the Indo-Pacific. I thought that the best way would be to listen to all of you. You have your own ideas or concern or maybe suggestions, so that even I can learn from your questions and comments. So I will not talk a lot. Let me stop here so that we can have better interaction. And let me thank all of you sincerely from my heart for giving me this opportunity and sharing my thoughts on this issue. Thank you very much.
And thank you very much, Professor Chintamani, for the very insightful presentation. It was really nice having that. And we have received a few questions already, so let me just start with this one, which will be from Cornelius Cornelson. I'm sorry if I mispronounced the name. It said, thank you for the discussion. Could you comment on India's relationship with Russia and how it can balance or reconcile ties with Russia while partnering with countries that are taking a very strong stance against Russia? Thank you.
No, at the moment, a war is going on in Europe, the deadliest war after World War II. And Russian military action in Ukraine has posed a serious challenge to the global order. Everyone knows that. But as far as India is concerned, what is happening in Russia is in a way impacting the whole world and not just Indo-Pacific. What India wants is a peaceful resolution of Ukrainian conflict or war through dialogue and diplomacy. Now, just by blaming one country, condemning an action will not lead to any peaceful resolution. So India does not oppose the American sanctions against Russia. India gives humanitarian assistance to Ukraine. India repeatedly says that this is not the era of war and the message is going to Moscow. At the same time, India wants to protect its energy security because almost more than 80% of energy India buys from abroad, and when there is disruption in the energy market, then the vibrant economy of India would be affected very, very negatively. So India buys oil from Russia. Now, there are some countries who think that how can India buy oil from Russia? Now, to that question, the Indian Foreign Ministry gives two answers. Number one, of course, by buying oil from Russia, we are protecting the energy security of India, and every country wants to protect its interest. Number two, if the European countries can buy oil from Russia, how can they say that don't buy oil from Russia? Is Europe not buying? Europe is buying more oil than India does. More recently, even the United States has started buying Russian origin oil through third party in the midst of the sanctions. Biden administration has allowed to do that. So those who are concerned that India is teaming up with Russia, they are wrong. India's relationship with Russia is long-lasting. And in fact, because of our own strategic compulsion along our border with China, all of you are aware of what kind of development took place about 4 years ago, 2020 in Galwan. And we buy some important weapon systems from Russia. Large number of weapon systems already in the Indian military are Russian origin. We are dependent on them even for spare parts and all. So India does not support the war, and India wants a peaceful negotiation to resolve the war. As we see it, it has become a proxy war with Ukraine getting all kinds of military support from the West. Even that support is now declining. And so sooner the issue is resolved, better it is. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And for the next question, how do you think European countries will react to this issue, and what do you think can be done to make more people get familiar with this issue? And just to make sure that we understand the question correctly, I think by this issue, is it referred to India's Indo-Pacific strategy in general or a more specific issue? I don't know if Ibuki-san will have a comment on this.
Can you please repeat the question slowly? I could not get it.
Oh, sorry, yes, of course. So the question says, what or how do you think European countries will react to this issue, and what do you think can be done to make more people become familiar with this issue? And
Which
I'm
issue?
not
Ukraine. Ukraine issue. Which issue?
I think I'm not exactly sure what's being referred to here. I think the question is maybe just India's strategy in the Pacific in general.
In general.
But yeah, but of course, the person who asked the question can correct me if I'm interpreting it wrong.
If
In general, yes.
With general one, let me say that India is not promoting formation of new alliances. India is not supporting, militarily ganging up against China. India rather would like to have more and more collaboration with other countries in the region, so that China would rather prefer to become a stakeholder and collaborate and cooperate rather than oppose. China says that Quad is an Asian NATO. Initially, they denigrated Quad by saying it's just like an ocean foam, it will dissipate. But later, particularly since 2017, when Quad was revived, it was the Chinese narrative which says that it is a kind of Asian NATO in the formative stage, to which India has repeatedly said that it is not an Asian NATO, and rather in Quad, the goal are four. One is, of course, maintaining health security. Every country in the world were affected by the pandemic, and India contributed a great deal by supplying vaccines to more than 100 countries through what is known as vaccine Maitri or vaccine friendship. The other one are the disruptive technologies which are coming into being, and those disruptive technologies are not going to affect only people-to-people relationship. It is going to affect even the military developments, and different kind of technologies are going to change the order itself, the social order, and even the geopolitical order. So how best to manage the emerging technology? So there is a key pillar of the Quad collaboration. Third one is, of course, all of us have witnessed tremendous amount of disruption to the supply chains, and most of the supply chains pass through China. And the way China handled the pandemic, and other countries were affected because of the supply chain disruption. Now the idea is to have at least an alternative source of supply chain, so that important strategic and health-related materials would continue to flow, even if there is disruption for whatever reasons, either natural disaster or man-made disaster. This is where India and Japan are at least having a policy to create a new kind of Asia-Africa growth corridor. And Australia, Japan, and India are now collaborating in planning out alternative supply chains. So if you see India's policy, it is more development-oriented, growth-oriented, and tackling challenges by non-state actors and the natural disasters, rather than militarization and things like that.
Okay, thank you very much for the answer. And for the next question, it asks, what will you think, how will you think India's recent, do you think India's recent initiatives will change in case Trump comes back to office next year?
You see, whenever there is an election in the US, the American people don't think about the rest of the world. American leaders think only about 2 or 3 countries, Russia, China, and things like that. But the rest of the world very carefully watches the American presidential election. And generally people think that if Republican leader comes to power, then what will happen? If Democrat comes to power, then what will happen? In my study of the US for about 30 years now, the bottom line is this: whether it is a Democrat or a Republican, the changes are going to be only cosmetic, and the rhetoric rather than the policies, whether it is Donald Trump or Joe Biden, the fundamental national security policy of the US are going to remain the same. There will be certain issues where there may be political differences, whether it is how to tackle immigration. Both the Republicans and Democrats would like to tackle immigration, but how to do it? In the how of things, there may be a little change. But as far as the goals of American national security and America's engagement with the rest of the world are going to be by and large same. I'll give you just one example. China. Donald Trump was the person who began an economic Cold War with China. And when Joe Biden came to power, there was expectation that Joe Biden, being a Democrat, would rather engage China than push them into a tariff war. But what happened? Joe Biden policies are stricter, and most of them are continuation of Donald Trump policy. So the European countries are actually concerned about Donald Trump more than India. The reason why the European countries are concerned is because of Donald Trump's earlier position on alliances. He undermined NATO. He undermined the US-Japan Treaty Alliance, US-South Korea Treaty Alliance, very loose talk. But if you see the real development, even after 4 years of Trump administration, NATO did not disintegrate. US-Japan relationship, US-South Korea relationship continued. So if Trump comes to power, there will be a lot of impact in the domestic politics of the US, because the way Trump is running the election after what happened in 2020 election, that is a cause of concern for large number of American people. There is a core constituency in the Republican Party which have thrown their weight on behalf of Trump, but even within the Republican parties, there are worries. So it is going to have more domestic impact than on the foreign policy and national security, I would say.
Okay, thank you very much. And for the next question, what do you think is a priority area for Japan-India collaboration this year? And do you think there are any potential areas of tension between these two countries? Thank you.
Japan and India did not have any tension ever in the relationship. However, the potentiality of India-Japan economic, strategic, and technological cooperation has always been huge. During the Cold War time, Japan and India were not able to use that potential because of the Cold War compulsions and geopolitical developments. Now, Japan was a strategic alliance partner, is a strategic alliance partner with the United States. And India followed a policy of non-alignment. Japan followed a policy of alignment. So on strategic issues, a lot of differences were there. But even then, during the Cold War, Japan was one of the largest aid giver to India, and India was probably the largest recipient of ODA, Official Development Assistance of Japan. After the Cold War, and particularly after China's not so peaceful rise, Japan and India have many things in common in terms of understanding the new strategic developments in the Indo-Pacific region. India and Japan, which earlier did not have any defense and security dialogue and a certain level of cooperation, now they are having that cooperation. Japan, India, and the United States have a trilateral mechanism to address serious strategic issues in the Indo-Pacific. Japan, India, and Australia have another trilateral mechanism to address different kind of issues, including the supply chains disruption. Japan, India, and France have another trilateral where they want to address the issues in the Indo-Pacific. So I think India-Japan relationship has taken a very positive trajectory of growth. Both Prime Minister Shinzo Abe earlier and later, even now, Prime Minister Kishida, they have given very primary importance to India in addressing the issues of the Indo-Pacific. It is also because India's growth and development. Let me share with you that when I was a school kid and I was getting milk powder in the school during the recession, that milk powder came from the United States. At that time, even ordinary pencil was imported from Great Britain. India had the largest number of illiterate people and uneducated people and poor people in the world at that time. We had a lot of differences on linguistic line and religious line and communal rights. From that time, today, if you see, India has become the 5th largest economy in the world. Very soon, it is going to be the 4th largest economy in the world, and Germany's economy is going to go down. This is the projection. Today, India is the largest producer of milk in the world. It is on the top 5 position according to Food and Agriculture Organization in the production of all kinds of agricultural products and livestock. India has a resilient democracy. It has proven military capabilities. India is a global player. The kind of diplomatic skill India has was reflected very recently in having a consensus in the G20 meeting. So India is different. Indo-Pacific without India is meaningless. So it is in Japan's interest to engage India. And India sees in Japan a true friend, a natural partner, where given the issues, economic, trade, technology, and even very difficult strategic issues, India and Japan have to come together. I think 2024 is going to be another area of growth of Indo-Japan cooperation, even if there are changes in the government. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And I guess you actually answered you touched upon the next question as well, which is about whether it would be possible for India and Japan to upgrade the security cooperation. And I think you just talked about that. So maybe if I can add something to the question. So I think the US recently proposed that India could join the so-called NATO Plus, which India has refused. Could you talk more general about India's understanding of itself in the regional security cooperation network? Because you mentioned that India has a lot of cooperations going on with the neighboring countries, and yet a NATO membership is not under consideration. So could you just talk in general about your thoughts on that? Thank you.
Recently there was a proposal to have a liaison office of NATO in Tokyo. That did not work. Now, USA, Australia, and UK, they have come up with AUKUS, right? And India from the very beginning is more supportive of cooperation and collaboration than militarization of relationship by forming alliances. Now, although non-aligned movement is no longer relevant, countries which are developing very fast, that includes India, would rather like to have strategic autonomy rather than sign onto dotted lines and have very hardcore alliance relationship. The reason is also practical, and that reason is, suppose, alliance against whom? Are there going to be alliance against China? The United States does more trade with China than with India. The United States has much more investment in China than with India. There are more number of Chinese students in the US than hundreds of thousands of Indian students. China and the US are so interdependent that even imagining a Cold War kind of relations with them is not possible. That is why I describe US-China relationship as a cold confrontation rather than Cold War. So there cannot be an alliance against China. And NATO was the byproduct of the Cold War. And later, even after the end of the Cold War, the Soviet demise, NATO continued. The NATO member countries tried to redefine the goals of NATO, and they did that. But India would rather collaborate with member countries on very many issues of concern rather than be part of a very close-knit alliance. India would believe in some kind of bilateral, trilateral, even multilateral mechanism if there is a need to cooperate, and India will do that. During World War II, also India was part of the Allied powers, right? So India would maintain its strategic autonomy, and India will not welcome any formation of NATO or ASEAN NATO. That is my understanding of the government of India's policy.
Okay, thank you very much for the clarification. And now to a very different question. What could India do to solve the human rights abuse in Myanmar? If there's anything India could do.
Myanmar is an issue which is even the ASEAN 9 not able to resolve, including Myanmar, ASEAN 10. ASEAN is not able to have a common position on Myanmar, and it is part of ASEAN. The United States is not able to do anything on Myanmar yet because it is, even though it is a superpower. We all are trying our best to somehow see that democracy returns to Myanmar. In fact, India is one of the victims of what's happening in Myanmar, including violation of human rights and political rights and civil rights and all. And the way different insurgent groups are winning literally an armed conflict with the junta, and some of them are coming to the Indian side in hundreds and sometimes in thousands. We are sending them back. And in the state of Mizoram, there are still large number of refugees who are coming. Now, India is a victim of this kind of conflict in the neighborhood for a long time. I recall during 1971 in East Pakistan, 10 million refugees came to India. 10 million to a country which is already overpopulated. So housing them, settling them is a very big issue. So we want a peaceful resolution to even what's happening in Myanmar. In our own limited way, through different kind of back channels and negotiation, we are trying to impress upon different warring parties that ultimately Myanmar has to settle down. Myanmar is having a lot of economic cost because of the situation there. So our leeways are not too much. It's very limited. Myanmar has been from the very beginning, remaining isolated from the rest of the world. Again, when they became part of ASEAN, we thought it would change, but difficult things are happening. One of the key reasons why government of India's position is circumscribed, because a lot of insurgents from the northeast part of India, they get hideouts in Myanmar. And we have to collaborate with the government so that our own direct core interest is not affected in a very negative way. So many countries have different kind of compulsion, but we support human rights in Myanmar and in any other country in the world.
Okay, thank you very much. And to the next question from Robert, what is the state of Taiwan-India relations and have those evolved in recent years? Thank you.
India-Taiwan relations are increasing by the day. For a long time, India did not have any, even adequate normal relationship with Taiwan. But now things have changed in a very big way. We understand that China wants every country in the world, including India, to support one China policy. And we do that. But when China wants India to repeat that, we don't repeat it. One of the reasons why we are developing ties with Taiwan is a semiconductor superpower. Taiwan is an economic powerhouse. Taiwan is having very good relationship and deep economic ties with very many ASEAN countries. Although in terms of political legitimacy, the number of countries which have recognized Taiwan's independence are shrinking by the day because China is really buying support, bribing them, threatening them, investing in those countries and things like that. But Taiwan has existed as a de facto independent country for a long time. And having a relationship with Taiwan is good for many countries, including India, to have collaboration in the field of technology, in the field of semiconductor, even mutual trade. So when China objects to it, then we have our own answer. You can have a relationship with Pakistan-occupied Kashmir, and if we have a relationship with Taiwan, then what is your problem? China is building roads as part of the CPEC, China-Pakistan Economic Corridor, in the disputed territory of Pakistan-occupied Kashmir. So they cannot have double standard. Now, when China has that kind of investment in Pakistan-occupied Kashmir, and Indian ships go to explore energy in the Vietnamese waters in South China Sea, the Chinese complain. So this kind of double talk will not work. So we'll continue to have a relationship with Taiwan, but we will not interfere in the political position on Taiwan issue.
Okay, thank you very much. And I see we still have about 5 questions left in the chat. Let's go through this one so that we can finish on time around 3 p.m. And so for the next question, do you think that the rise of ethnic origin Indian politicians in the UK and US will have or is having any impact on India's relationship with those countries?
It's a very interesting question. So all those people who are of Indian origin in Western countries, they are the citizens of those countries. They look after all kinds of domestic, economic, political, security interest of those countries. Now, simply because they're Indians, they're not going to improve ties with India. I would rather say that most of the countries, when did not have Indians at the helm of affairs, had very close ties with India. What they may do is to continue that relationship rather than have any kind of new relationship with India. In case of the United States of America, the US government actually takes the help of the Indian American community to interact, to engage in dialogue with the Indian counterparts. At some point, those who believe in area studies and the importance of knowing the culture, language of a particular country, how to really interact and understand them rather than through only the English media, they believe that if the Indian American community who are in important position would interact with Indians, the US government can understand India better. So that is why they deploy them to improve ties with India. But otherwise, there is not going to be anything special about it. In fact, there are so many drawbacks as well. Like, for example, the kind of problem we have with Canada. In Canada, there are a large number of people from Indian origin background who are supporting separatism in India, and they support Khalistani movement. And we don't like that. There are quite a few of them in Australia and some of them there in the US who promote separatism of India. And those are actually the drawbacks. So we should not think that simply because those leaders or top government officials are of Indian origin, they are going to do anything extra favor to India. No, they don't do it.
Okay, thank you very much for the answer. And I will try to merge 2 questions since they're both about the education and the younger generation. So the first question is, more broadly, what are your thoughts on the poor state of the internationalization of higher education in India? And second question is if there are any examples of the younger generation trying to tackle this issue about the Indo-Pacific in general that can inspire young people to work on these issues on an individual level. Thank you.
You see, the Indian students in the US contribute about $7 billion to American GDP every year. And a large number of Indian students go to Canada and even Australia, and they contribute to their GDP. Now, India wants to internationalize the campuses, not to earn money. India has started a policy of internationalization and now trying to deepen it, because it is important that these foreign students coming and residing in the campuses and understanding India, Indian culture, and going back to their respective countries, and again occupying important positions, they are going to be the real bridge builders in the relationship, whether in terms of trade or investment, or even understanding one another's compulsions and all. So internationalization of campus is actually a good thing. Every country does that to some extent by giving fellowships and scholarships and all that. we have the same policy. At the moment, nationals of about 80 countries, they study in India, but the number is really minuscule, minuscule. And we're trying to expand that. Another thing that we are trying to do through internationalization of the campuses in India is to promote capacity building, particularly in Africa, Central Asia, and some countries of Southeast Asia. So Indian education system is highly affordable, and the quality is okay. So all the students coming to India, getting training and getting a degree and learning a different kind of trade is in a way capacity building. And that particular policy is an important component of India's developmental collaboration with all these countries. About the Indo-Pacific, large number of campuses in India are not actually focusing on international relations yet. It is still a political science. International relations is only one little component in the political science discourses, which is not good. We have been trying to change that. And in this age of globalization, it is extremely important that students across disciplines, including political science, should be aware of global developments. And Indo-Pacific is such an important development that every student should know about it. But this is only a work in progress. We have a long way to go.
Thank you very much for answering both questions. And for the next one, how does India see Maldives' policy under the new president who's pursuing a closer relation with China?
A new president? Which president?
Muizu, if I'm pronouncing it correctly.
Yeah. One of the difficulties that we face in South Asia, all our neighbors have a border with India, and none of them have any border with the other country in South Asia. And India being a very big country, both in terms of size and population and economy, India becomes a political issue in all the neighboring countries, Nepal, Bangladesh, Sri Lanka, and now even Maldives. Now, India tries its best to have a good neighborly policy. India is the first responder to different kind of crises that take place in the neighborhood. For example, at one time in 1986, a group of terrorists were trying to come through the sea and capture power in Maldives. Maldives government sent an SOS to India. Indian Navy intervened and prevented the terrorists from taking power. More recently, there was a water crisis in Maldives. India was the first country to respond and send tons of water to Maldives. Recently, there was an earthquake in Nepal. India was the first responder to the earthquake victims in Kathmandu. More recently, India, tried to help Sri Lanka when it went into a deep debt crisis, almost on the verge of bankruptcy. Although China was a great friend, China did not come to the rescue when the real need came. So another problem that we're facing is not only domestic politics, but also China's interference. China is coming in a big way because they have the money power to Nepal, Bangladesh, Sri Lanka, and even Maldives. China has become more dependent on the Indian Ocean because of their economic requirements, raw materials and energy and all. So they are trying to build up puppet regimes in as many countries as possible, particularly in smaller countries. And that is creating actually a problem for India. Now this Muiju, President Muiju, when we visited China, during the election time, he said, we don't want Indians. And he was eyeing on the Chinese money. Sri Lanka has already burnt the finger. In the Hambantota port, when Sri Lanka came to India, India said commercially not viable. China goes there, gives the capital and the technician and the engineers and the laborers and built the Hambantota port. And they found Hambantota port is not commercially viable. And when Sri Lanka was not able to pay the debt, they signed an agreement. 99 years, China will operate that Hambantota port. So China is in. So similar kind of things are happening, were happening in other countries. Muiju does not understand at all. So Muizu is taking an anti-India stand for his political region. The opposition and other parties, they are not like this. We understand that, and we don't want to fight with Muizu, and we'll try to rather continue to maintain the positive relationship with Muizu. That is Government of India's goal. We're not going to punish them. We're not going to isolate them. We're not going to contest with China. Rather, wherever it is possible, we will be with our neighbors, because stability in neighborhood is important for India's growth story.
Thank you very much. I see we have missed one very last question. I'm sorry, I know it's 3 p.m. already, so maybe we can just take this one very briefly, and then let's give the word back to Robert, who will say a few things at the end. So the very last question is about, right, now it has disappeared again. Yes, it's what is the Indian position for Houthi, if I'm pronouncing that correctly?
That is Houthi rebels.
The Houthis in Yemen.
Red Sea. Yeah. You see,
Thank you.
the Houthis have attacked shipping left and right, and India was actually a victim of that. Some of the drone attack took place within India's exclusive economic zone, and there was a ship where a large number of crew members were Indians, and the Indian Navy was deployed to really protect them. So India is not supporting the Houthis, rather India is disturbed. One of the reasons of our recent visit to Tehran to hold dialogue with them is to protest that apparently Iran is supporting the Houthis, and the Houthis are disrupting trading activities of every country. And the Iranian side, they said that, look, the Houthis have made it very clear that they are targeting only Israelis and the Americans, but that's not true. And we are disturbed by it. We have deployed our own naval forces there to the extent possible to protect life and property. The situation in the Red Sea has become so dangerous. You know, I saw a news recently, which is an eye-opening news, that to use a drone, you need only $2,000. And the missile which is going to neutralize it or fight back is $2 million. So it is an asymmetrical warfare going on, very dangerous, very risky. It is going to escalate the inflation everywhere. So we are really concerned about the Houthi rebels doing that.
Well, thank you very much, Chintamani, for taking the time to brief us. And we're very happy that you could join us. And we also hope that you'll be able to see us soon in person in Tokyo. Thanks again. And I'd like to thank Evelyn for having chaired the meeting. Thanks so much. And also our student worker, Jan Hall, who's taking care of all the logistics for this. So thanks again. And thank you to all our participants.
Thank you. Have a good day, and namaste to all of you.